So I thought today first of all continuing a little bit from what we did on Wednesday night. We had Rebecca ask the question about sloth and torpor and how that fits into the five khandhas, etc. So I thought talking a little bit more about that and touching, as I do that, a little bit on all the five hindrances, and because all these hindrances basically go together. You can't really separate them out and say, kind of individualize them. Very often they support each other and make each other worse and all this kind of stuff. Sloth and torpor, which is the third hindrance. I think so. I think the third hindrance of the five hindrances. First of all, I think we could maybe change the translation a little bit. Words like torpor is pretty. I don't know, not many people talk about torpor these days. Oh, I've got so much torpor. Nobody ever says that. Yeah, it's just unheard of. And Bhikkhu Bodhi now, he uses dullness and drowsiness as the two things. I think that's much more descriptive and much more modern terms, which everybody kind of understands straight away. You're feeling dull, it means your mind is not bright. You kind of, you're not really, you may not want to sleep, but your mind isn't sharp. You don't know what you can't really think clearly and all this kind of things. That's what dullness is about. And drowsiness is often the sort of thing that you have after a meal. Yeah, you've eaten a lot, and then you kind of go back to your bed and boom, you're kind of out of it. That's called drowsiness. And so these are both very important things. And actually the two Pali words, tinna midda, they mean pretty much that. Midda is a term which is precisely about the kind of tiredness you have after you've eaten too much or eaten anything, really. Whereas that's midda, and tinna is more like general dullness of mind in general. And of course, the first thing that Ajahn Brahmali always says about sloth and torpor, dullness and drowsiness, I should say now, is that don't fight it. Yeah, this is kind of one of the most, and I think one of the very liberating kind of insights, understandings about this. If you feel that you shouldn't have drowsiness, you shouldn't be tired, you shouldn't be whatever, and you fight it, very often what you find is that you actually make the matter worse. You can't really fight these kind of mind states. And the reason you can't fight it is because dullness and drowsiness, by their very nature, these are states of mind where the mind is tired, the mind is already exhausted. If you fight tiredness, if you fight exhaustion of the mind, you make the matter worse because the very fighting takes more energy and then the mind becomes even more kind of tired. So it's not really the way to go. So the way to deal with tiredness is different. And one of the ways is, like Ajahn Brahmali always says, just relax, let it be, nod a little bit, yeah? It's okay to nod a little bit. One of the meditators I know who was a very good meditator, and he probably still is, he always starts off his meditation by nodding, yeah? You think, oh, he's a really bad meditator. But actually he turns out to be very good because then he brightens up and then he's kind of back to his meditation again. Yeah? That's kind of the idea here. So it's okay if you nod a little bit. Don't fear what other people think about you. Who cares about other people? Yeah, just do your thing. Yeah, do what you have to do. It's your practice. It's your life. It's your spiritual path. We're all different. You do what you think is right. Don't care about others. So this is the first thing. I think it's a very, very useful piece of advice. And Ajahn Sujato also mentioned the other day on Wednesday about the 7 ways of dealing with tiredness or dullness that the Buddha taught to Venerable Mahamoggallana, found in the Anguttara 7s, I think. And these are useful things. But remember, Mahamoggallana was one of the two chief disciples of the Buddha. He already had jhanas at this stage. He already had a very developed mind. So that kind of person would apply these kind of things. And it may not necessarily work for you. It depends on where your meditation is at. If your meditation is going well, you have good mindfulness, you're getting some joy in your meditation practice, that is when these kind of things work, because you already have the underlying qualities in your mind are already there. So because they're already there, all you have to do is to kind of overcome the more refined hindrances, and then you are in business, and you go even deeper as a consequence. So that is what you do if your meditation is already going well. And that is where all the insight, all the satipatthana insights become useful. A large part of satipatthana practice is to understand the 5 hindrances. Satipatthana is the last thing that you do before you get to samadhi. The very refined hindrances. But very often the problem with tiredness and dullness is that even though you sleep a lot, you sleep sufficiently, for some people it persists. Your mind never really becomes all that clear. One of the people told me this here the other day. It doesn't really get that clarity, and sometimes it can be all kind of reasons, maybe too much use of modern devices and internet and all these kind of things. But why is it that the mind never clears up? And one of the things about what you see in the suttas is that the 5 hindrances, sloth and torpor, is only talked about just before you enter samadhi. Before that, the Buddha always talks about 2 things, and that is ill will and desire. Ill will and desire is what he talks about. And that is what the 2 things that you focus on the path, almost all the way until your mindfulness is sufficiently established to enable you to watch the breath and do the satipatthana practice. So what is going on here is that the 5 hindrances, they are, all of them, all 5, are supported by the first 2 ones. The first 2 ones are by far the most important ones. If you have a lot of desires, if you have ill will, your mind is also going to be restless. You're going to be agitated. It makes sense. Craving is precisely a state of desiring something else. It's going to make you restless. It is obviously that is the case. But the point about craving and desire is that because it engages the mind, because it makes you think about things, it makes you look into the future, it makes you fantasize about things, it makes you, because of all the attachments or whatever else that we have, because of that, it also drains the energy from the mind. Because it drains the energy from the mind, it means that you will not have the clarity that you want to have. You won't have the energy, it won't be there. And this is a kind of dullness. It may not be an ordinary kind of dullness, but it's some degree of lack of sharpness in the mind. So the root cause of dullness, the root problem here is not so much, not something, you can't overcome the dullness just like that. You have to look for the deeper cause, and the deeper cause very often are the underlying desires and attachments that you have. That is where the real problem is, and that is where these things need to be resolved. If you try to just get rid of the dullness or the drowsiness, you're not going to be able to do it because the underlying thing is actually the problem here. And it's exactly the same thing with ill will. If you have anger, if you are upset about something, if there is a problem, that takes enormous amounts of energy. And if you think about a time when you had, you weren't very happy, you were upset about something, very often afterwards you feel tired, you feel exhausted, as if you have drained the mind of energy, and the dullness may come after that. So the 2 first hindrances, these are the things that drive the rest of the hindrances, all 5 of them, if you like. So very often it is useful to go back to those, and that is where you ultimately get rid of all the problems in the mind, and you get rid of the tiredness and all these kind of things. So this is what the Buddha talks about when he talks about investigation. Investigate, look very carefully what the causes are of these things. Try to see very clearly. And sometimes investigation can be very difficult. Sometimes we don't really know how to do the investigation properly. So these are the kind of some of the guidelines that you find in the suttas. Go back to the desire and ill will. That is usually where the problem is. And as long as you can reduce those in the right way, then the other hindrances will also disappear by the wayside. So this is where the focus really should be. So how can we reduce these desires and ill will in a way that sharpens the mind and makes the meditation work and all these kind of things? And one of the ways that the Buddha teaches is using metta practice. It's fairly obvious that if you practice metta, then it will obviously reduce ill will. I think that's obviously fairly obvious because it is the exact antidote to ill will. But one of the interesting things that metta also reduces desires. This is the other interesting thing here. One of the things that Buddha says in the suttas is that the reason why people go to sensual pleasures is because they suffer. Because most people, there is only one escape from suffering. The only pleasures that we usually know about in the world are sensual pleasures. We go and eat something, we go and see some entertainment, or whatever it is. We move towards that because that is the escape from problems in life. So if you suffer, you go to some sensual pleasures. But if you don't suffer, obviously then it means that you have less interest in those sensual pleasures. The more internal happiness you have, the more content you are with your life, the more happy, the more things are sorted out for you. And of course, part of that is metta. If you have a lot of kindness and compassion for the world in general, then of course it means that you will have less suffering. And because you have less suffering, you will be less attracted to the sensual pleasures of the world. So it's very powerful, metta practice. It overcomes anger, obviously, and then because it overcomes anger and because you generally feel good about yourself, who is the first beneficiary of metta practice? It's you. You're the first beneficiary. Other people benefit as well. This is one of the great little kind of quotes about I think about what is a spiritual practice? What is a spiritual path? Anything which is good for you and also good for others. That is spirituality. The world is usually different. It's either good for me and bad for others, or maybe bad for others or good for others and bad for you. That's kind of the worldly way. That's the greed and delusion and these kind of things. But anything which is spiritual can be defined as something which is good for oneself and also good for other people. If it has those two qualities, it's usually a spiritual quality. That's metta. When you have metta, it's good for you. You're the first beneficiary, but it's also good for other people at the same time. So the metta overcomes the ill will. It reduces the sensual desires. And because it reduces all of these things, and because it brightens up the mind, metta is a beautiful mind state that has clarity with it, that has all of these positive things. It also reduces the drowsiness and dullness of the mind, and of course also the restlessness, because restlessness also is a sign of discontent, wanting something else, the mind moving in a different direction. So all these wonderful things that comes out of metta practice. So how do we do this? What do we do for metta practice? And one of the important things that took me a long time to learn, but eventually kind of sank in, is that metta practice is not primarily about what we do in our meditation. Very often people think that metta is a meditation practice where you wish everyone well or the whole world well, and that is part of it. That's part of what metta is about. But it starts long before that. This kind of metta where you wish everyone well, if it works for you, it's wonderful. But some people say, I can't feel anything. I can't feel any feelings. I'm just sitting here saying, may all beings be well, but it doesn't feel like I really mean it. I'm just saying these things. And very often what we need to do is we need to start with more basic things that we actually know work. And the Buddha says, and he says this in a few places, that metta starts off with how we live our daily lives, how we treat the people around us. Do we treat them with kindness? What does metta really mean? It means that we are kind to other people, we are friendly, we speak in the right way, we treat them with kindness. That is where metta starts. And I think this is very powerful. I'm not going to read out these suttas because I could, but I'm not going to do it anyway. But it is very powerful because if you train yourself to be friendly in ordinary life, in everyday life situations, in the monastery, at Jhana Grove, wherever you are, what it does, it kind of drags your mind along as well, because it forces you to think differently. You cannot really be kind to someone you're angry with. If you're going to be kind to somebody, it's almost like you have to shift your perception beforehand. So it kind of helps you to shift your perception. If you continuously think about, how can I be kind? How can I say the right thing? You're also dragging your mind along. And in this way, you're changing your whole perspective. And you're learning the idea of kindness just by acting in a kind way and speaking in a kind way. And one of the things that I always found is that when I asked some of the meditation teachers around about how to practice metta, some of the ones that are famous for the metta practice, very often the advice you get is very down to earth. It's about, just be kind, just be gentle to other people. That is the best kind of metta practice. And that's how you start out. And then once you've started do things in this way, of course, the next thing then is to change the way you think about people, change the way you think about the world. It tends to come along, and you learn how to think in the right way. I'll maybe talk a little bit about this in a second. And then when all of these things are in place, that is when you can start to do the metta meditation, where you actually wish the whole world well. Yeah, and then it may start to bite because you're already kind. You already have a soft heart. Your mind is already leaning in the right direction. And now, when you say, "May all beings be well," you mean it. Yeah, you really mean it. You really feel that other people deserve it. And of course, then that is when the happiness comes with this, because it's pure, it's real. It is actually your intention to do this. So what I will do now, I'll just read out a little bit about metta from one of the best suttas about metta is the Kakachupama Sutta, the simile of the soul that probably many of you know already. And there's a few passages in there that I really like about this sutta. And I'll just there's a few nice similes in here, and then I'll just comment briefly on this as we go along. Yeah. So this is a monk who gets upset about things. Yeah, he's kind of been doing bad stuff or whatever. He gets upset when people talk to him the wrong way. And then this is what the Buddha says to him about this. He says, "When others address you, their speech may be timely or untimely. When others address you, their speech may be true or untrue. When others address you, their speech may be gentle or harsh. When others address you, their speech may be connected with good or with harm. When others connect you, their speech may be spoken with a mind of loving kindness or with inner hate." Yeah, so people speak. Speech is often kind of the hard, often very difficult to deal with. People say all kind of stuff, and we have to know how to react to these things in the right way. Learn to react in the right way. And of course, what the Buddha says here, is regardless of what other people say to you, you should never really get angry as a consequence. So what he says then is that when others address you in either of these ways, he says, "Bhikkhus, you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected. We will utter no evil words or bad words. We shall abide compassionate for their welfare with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. We shall abide pervading that person with a mind imbued with loving kindness. And starting with them, we shall abide pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will." That is how you should train bhikkhus. So regardless of how people talk to you, you should remain unaffected. And this, so you. And of course, this is precisely what I was talking about before. Here we are kind of moving towards not just being kind to other people, but how to actually deal with the mind, how we actually make sure that we don't react in the wrong way. And of course, the way to do this is always to make it something very impersonal. Someone else is speaking, someone else is doing this. And we were talking about noise the other day, and this is really just an extension of the idea of noise. When somebody talks to you, remember, it is their problem. They are the ones who are talking the way they're doing. Whether it's in the wrong way or the right way, it's got nothing really to do with you. They are just acting out their inner conditioning. This is kind of where sometimes people ask about non-self, but the idea of non-self is very often very profound. This is one very nice way of making the idea of non-self practical. Non-self means that we are conditioned beings. It means that when people do things, they do them not because of some kind of essential them, which is opposed to the essential you. It's just the conditioning coming out. And when you remember that, then of course it is much easier to deal with these things in the right way. Not to be affected by these things, allowing them to be here. Like I said last time, when you hear a noise, it's just like the wind in the trees. That's all it is. It's just contact. Another thing that they say in the suttas. It's just the contact. Your ear is contacted by sound, and because of that, or ear is contacted by whatever, and then the sound arises in your mind. And when you look at it as a purely natural phenomenon, then, of course, the problem starts to disappear, and you stop reacting to these things. Because you cannot. It's impossible to have a life when everyone just treats you well all the time and all you hear is nice things. That is not what we should aim for, because if you're aiming for that, you're aiming for Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, and that, or whatever it is, I'm not sure if that, some kind of fairy tale anyway, like the princess riding off with the prince or whatever that we had last week. Yeah, that's what you're aiming for then, the fairy tales. Please don't aim for the fairy tales, because it's not going to get you anywhere here. So not only do you remain unaffected, but then you abide compassionate for them. And this is kind of the beautiful thing, that when you hear people say bad things or do bad things, instead of actually becoming angry with them, instead of becoming upset with them, what you do is you have a sense of compassion instead. And the reason you do that, how you can do that, is very simply to remember that the person who has a problem here is the other person. Yeah, they're the ones who are getting upset. They're the ones who are saying bad things. They're the ones who are making bad karma for themselves. They're the ones who are causing themselves suffering in the future through the bad actions. So instead of focusing on yourself and thinking, oh, this is about me, they are being bad towards me, that's when you get upset and angry. Instead, you remember they are the one who have a problem. And because they have a problem, because they are deluded, because they don't know what they're doing, what you're doing is turning the table around. And instead of focusing on yourself, you're focusing on them instead. And then you can actually have compassion in that kind of situation. So remember that. Remember when you look at somebody on, whoever it is, and they're doing the wrong thing. Remember, there's no point in getting upset with them. Far better to be compassionate and understand that they actually have a problem. And then, through that, it is sometimes possible to get a resolution with these things. Certainly for yourself, perhaps more deeply as well, even with them. Often people react much better if you have compassion for them than if you get angry, of course. And then, the interesting thing here, it says, we shall abide pervading that person with a mind imbued with loving kindness. And starting with them, we abide, pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train monks. And very interesting here how it says that you should start with that person. Because starting with that person is not usually how people are taught to do loving kindness meditation. But the point here is that if you practice in the right way, you don't normally have ill will towards people. Usually you are open to people. Usually you kind of have given up this idea of having enmity to people around you. As a Buddhist, you can't really afford to have enemies. If you have enemies, then of course that is, generally speaking, we shouldn't have enemies in the world. If you have some enemies in the world, if you have enmity towards somebody, then what happens if you're going to die tomorrow? What happens if this is your last day? Can you really afford ever to have enemies? And you can't, because if you die with a heart of enmity or hatred or anger against someone, it's going to be difficult. So remember, this is one of those great things. You cannot afford that, because eventually the day is going to come. And when the day comes, if you still harbor that in your heart, you're going to have a problem. You're not going to have a peaceful death. You're not going to move on peacefully. So because it's assumed here that we generally don't have any anger or ill will, if that ill will is about to arise, someone is there and they're saying the wrong thing, that's why we start with them, because it's already assumed that our mind is fairly pure. So we start with them, and then when we start with them, we purify them as well, and then, of course, we are rid of all the problems and the hindrances that might stop you in your meditation and from spreading that metta towards the whole world. It's kind of interesting. Sometimes it's different in the sutta sometimes than what people often are taught due to maybe commentarial standards. It is not that what the commentary says necessarily is wrong, but it is just that there are kind of different levels of practicing the metta. There are different ways of doing it and different approaches. And this is kind of probably the Buddha's very high approach to practice this. And you see it's really a high ideal that is often difficult perhaps to meet. Anyway, so you abide pervading the all-encompassing world, the mind imbued with loving kindness, exalted, abundant, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is what we are heading toward. That's where we want to go eventually. And then we have a couple of similes. And so I'll just read out these similes just for to kind of drive home the idea of what loving kindness eventually does to you if you practice it in the right way. And because suppose a man came with a hoe and a basket and said, I shall make this great earth to be without earth. He would dig here and there, strew the soil here and there, spit here and there, and urinate here and there, saying, be without earth, be without earth. What do you think, bhikkhus? Could that man make this great earth to be without earth? No, Venerable Sir. Why is that? Because this great earth is deep and immense. It is not easy to make it be without earth. Eventually the man would reap only weariness and disappointment. So this is the idea of taking metta to the highest point. Now we're talking about the really high states of metta. So the idea here is that you make your mind like the earth. You expand your mind out. You make it vast and enormous like the earth. This is kind of the idea here. And if you think about it, it's useful to sometimes think about what it means to have an expansive mind. What does it mean? And one of the ways of thinking about it is thinking about, for example, when you, I'm sure you know this already, but just to kind of make it more clear, sometimes if you feel really greedy about something or you don't want to share with someone else, sometimes you have this kind of you have kind of this constricted mind state, where you feel concerned about yourself, you're not really interested in the world around you, you're not generous, your heart is not open to others. And when you are greedy like that, you feel like you're in your little world, your own little world, and you're separated from others, and others almost become dangerous because they might take these things away from you that you're attached to. This is a small world, a small mind. But sometimes you may feel really generous. It's like your heart opens up and you want to give to the whole world. You want to support everyone. I'm sure all of you have had that experience sometimes when you just feel incredibly generous. And it's like you open up and your mind expands out and you don't feel you have to protect yourself anymore. You don't feel like a small thing where everyone else is scary. In fact, you start to incorporate the whole world into your sphere of attention. The fear goes away. You are no longer anxious about the world around you. And it's exactly the same thing with metta and anger. If you're angry, you're protecting yourself. You're afraid of the world around you. If you have metta, you include everyone else in. And it's as if your mind expands out. There's no barriers there anymore. There's no fear. There's no us and them. Everyone else is included in your life. And you have the sense of kindness towards everyone else. So when you make your mind like the great earth, if somebody comes and digs into you a little bit, they kind of try to irritate you, or they say something bad, because your mind is so large, it doesn't really matter anymore. It's just like a tiny corner of your mind is being kind of, spitting and urinating, I talk about here. Very earthy kind of language, which is kind of nice, isn't it? A nice earthy language, kind of get things real. There's no kind of messing around. And it doesn't matter. People do these nasty things to you, very unpleasant, but it's only a tiny corner of your mind. And you can sort of let go of it straight away because it doesn't matter anymore, because your mind is so large. But if that little corner is all you have, you are in serious trouble when somebody urinates in that corner. Because then you're going to get angry. You don't want that. And this is the problem that happens then. So it's a nice image. Make your mind like the earth, vast and expansive, exalted. This is what this is about. Okay. Next one. Suppose a man came with crimson, turmeric, indigo, and carmine and said, I shall draw pictures and make pictures appear on empty space. What do you think, bhikkhus? Could that man draw pictures and make pictures appear on empty space? No, Venerable Sir. Why is that? Because empty space is formless and invisible. It is not easy to draw pictures there, make pictures appear there. Eventually that man would reap only weariness and disappointment. I like the kind of understatement. It is not easy to draw pictures there. Right. Okay, that's good. And another nice little simile. You come with all these colors. These are all colors, crimson and carmine and indigo and turmeric. These are all different colors. And This is why Ajahn Brahmali changes the translation so you actually understand what the colors mean. Yeah, although, because these colors are kind of more obscure. You have to have been grown up in an English-speaking society to know what these colors mean. Even then, you probably might not know because they're pretty obscure. So red, blue, and yellow would have been a bit better there. Anyway, so so this man comes along. He wants to paint pictures in empty space. Yeah, good luck. And of course, the point is that here is that empty space is empty. And if you practice metta to the highest extent, you also tend to become empty inside. Yeah, because why is that? Because our sense of identity is what makes us non-empty usually. We identify with various things, all kind of things in this world. But the more metta you have, the more you let go of all that identity here, and all you become is a blob of kindness and metta instead. Is that a nice idea? This blob of metta walking through the world. And some people look like that. They look like this blob is kind of floating through the world, of kindness and compassion. And it's kind of beautiful. And they make no imprint. They make no there's no footsteps. It's just kind of this beautiful thing flowing through the world. And because you have no identity anymore, because all you identify is a sense of metta and kindness inside of you, it is very hard to upset you. The reason why we get upset usually if people talk to us in the wrong way is precisely because we have an identity that challenge our identity. They say Norwegians are evil people. Norwegians kill whales. Yeah, oh, you are Norwegian, must mean you are evil too because Norwegians kill whales. Or the Vikings, I remember the Vikings. That's probably what Venerable Chanda thinks. I remember my ancestors, they were oppressed by the Vikings. I still harbor anger for those Vikings. They came to our country and they were really bad. Yeah, or something like that. Once you have a sense of identity, I am, or you are proud about something. Pride is a very dangerous thing. As soon as you have pride, somebody's going to tear down your pride because pride means you identify with the certain things inside of you. The less identity you have, and this is what metta does, it reduces your identity. After a while, you don't really feel like anything anymore. You don't feel male or female. You don't feel rich or poor. You don't even feel like you have a body in a sense. And all of this identity stuff disappears. You are empty. And nobody can paint anything in your mind. Nobody can touch you anymore. They can't really get to you through the way they speak or through anything else. The beautiful thing about emptiness. So go for the emptiness inside. Go for the lack of identity and just have a sense of metta. And because the metta is enough identity in itself. If you have metta, if you feel like you are that metta, that is sufficient. In fact, not only sufficient, that's the only thing you want to identify with. And that's why you then, when you pass away, you get reborn in the Brahma world. You get reborn in this high realm because you identify only with that, nothing else. It's a beautiful idea. So don't try to make drawings on empty space. If you see an arahant, don't get angry with them because you're trying to, this is what eventually what you end up doing, trying to draw an empty space. Can't be done. And then the last simile here, which is a very famous simile that this sutta is named after. I'll read it out as well, simply because it is such a nice simile here. Because even if bandits were to sever you savagely limb by limb with a two-handled saw, he who gave rise to a mind of hate towards them would not be carrying out my teaching. Herein, bhikkhus, you should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected, we shall utter no evil words. We shall abide compassionate for their welfare with a mind of loving kindness without inner hate. We shall abide pervading them with a mind imbued with loving kindness. And starting with them, starting with the bandits with a two-handled saw, that's who you start with. They're cutting you up by a two-handled saw. You start with them. Starting with them, we shall abide pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train bhikkhus. So are you ready for that test? We shall not test. We shall not try tonight because it would be very messy in here if we try this. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because it seems too challenging. It seems too much. How can you possibly have metta towards somebody who takes a saw, revs up the chainsaw and starts cutting you to pieces? It's hard to imagine how we can do that. But of course, the way you can do that is always to remember if somebody comes along and cuts you up, with a two-handled saw or whatever, Who is making the bad karma here? Who is the one who has trouble? Who is the one who is deluded? Who is the one who is really going to suffer? If somebody cuts you up with a two-handled sword, you're not going to last long. Then you die, you get reborn in the Brahma world. No problem. No big deal. What's the problem? No, so just relax. Okay, cut away. That's how you hear. And sometimes in the suttas, you find the monks committing suicide because they kind of had enough anyway. So they kind of, whoops, off to the Brahma world we go. So this is the right way of thinking about these things. If you keep that mind of yours pure, nothing bad can happen to you. But the fellow or the people who cut you up, where do you think they're going to go? Especially if you have that kind of mind of loving kindness. Actually, you should get angry so they make less bad karma. If you have lots of loving kindness, they will... No, that's just a joke. You should not do that. Keep your mind of loving kindness. And of course, they are the ones who are in trouble. Because they are going to have some very serious repercussions from actually cutting up someone who is so pure. And that is how you can have metta for them. That's how you have compassion for them, despite the terrible acts. This is how it works. It takes a kind of different perspective. You have to look at the world in a slightly different way. But once you get into that, once you understand what's going on, it's possible, it can be done. Because actually, this is, from a Buddhist point of view, is actually a perspective that is based on right view, based on right outlook. And because of that, it is actually much more realistic than the ordinary kind of way that we deal with things and the way we look at things in the world. So this is the training to be done. And maybe, not maybe. So, so that is how ultimately we practice. And ultimately, if you keep on doing this, I just like these similes and I like these kind of ways of looking at metta. It's very beautiful and very inspiring. And sometimes you need some kind of lofty image to draw you towards these things. But remember where it starts. It starts with how you treat people in ordinary life. It starts with how you speak to others, how you act towards them. It starts with how we think about others in our ordinary life. And if you can shift that gradually, eventually you get to this. It may seem unreachable. That is only because right now it is unreachable. But as you gradually move in that direction, one day it will be reachable. And then you will get there. Just have to be practical about it. And do it in a skillful and wise way. So that is a little bit about the hindrances and how to, in the end, in the long run, overcome the dullness and the sloth, the tiredness of the mind, drowsiness of the mind. That's how to do it.